The humid Miami air hung heavy over Biscayne Bay on the night of August 15, 2012, carrying with it the familiar blend of salt water, diesel fumes from passing boats, and the faint aroma of Cuban coffee from the nearby cafes that never seemed to close. The city pulsed with its characteristic energy, a vibrant mix of Latin music, tourist chatter, and the distant sound of waves lapping against the seawalls that protected this tropical metropolis from the ever-present threat of storms. Isabela Rodriguez had lived in Miami her entire 34 years, and she still found magic in the city's ability to reinvent itself with each passing day. As the sun set over the bay, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples that reflected off the glass towers of downtown, she felt the familiar pull that had drawn her to the water since childhood. Tonight, like many nights before, she planned to take her evening swim at her favorite secluded spot along the Rickenbacker Causeway. Isabela was a striking woman with long, dark hair that she typically wore pulled back in a practical ponytail, olive skin that spoke to her Cuban and Colombian heritage, and dark brown eyes that seemed to hold depths of understanding beyond her years. She worked as a marine biologist for the Miami-Dade Environmental Resources Management Division, a job that perfectly combined her love for the ocean with her commitment to protecting the delicate ecosystem of South Florida. Her apartment in Coconut Grove was a testament to her passion for marine life. The walls were covered with underwater photographs she had taken during her research dives, and her bookshelves were filled with scientific journals and field guides to tropical fish species. A large aquarium dominated one corner of the living room, home to a collection of native Florida marine species that she studied and occasionally rehabilitated before releasing them back into the wild. Isabela's evening swims were more than just exercise. They were a form of meditation, a way to connect with the environment she had dedicated her life to studying and protecting. She had discovered her preferred swimming spot 3 years earlier while conducting a water quality survey. It was a small cove formed by rock jetties near the base of the Rickenbacker Causeway, hidden from the main road and largely unknown to tourists and casual swimmers. The location offered several advantages that appealed to Isabela's scientific mind and her desire for solitude. The water was typically cleaner than at the public beaches, thanks to the natural filtration provided by the rock formations. The cove was deep enough for serious swimming but protected enough to avoid the strong currents that could make solo swimming dangerous. Most importantly, it was usually deserted after sunset, giving her the peace and quiet she craved after long days dealing with bureaucratic meetings and environmental impact reports. On this particular evening, Isabela's routine was slightly different than usual. She had spent the day testifying at a city council meeting about a proposed marina development that she believed would damage critical seagrass beds in Biscayne Bay. The meeting had been contentious, with developers and their lawyers challenging her scientific data and questioning her qualifications. Though she had successfully defended her research, the experience had left her feeling drained and frustrated. Her younger sister Carmen, who worked as a nurse at Jackson Memorial Hospital, had offered to join her for dinner at their favorite Cuban restaurant in Little Havana, but Isabela had declined. She needed the healing power of the ocean to wash away the stress of the day. Carmen understood her sister's need for solitude. The Rodriguez family had always been connected to the water, with their grandfather having been a fisherman in Cuba before the family's emigration to Miami in the 1960s. Isabela drove her white Honda Civic along the Rickenbacker Causeway as the last light faded from the western sky. The causeway, with its spectacular views of downtown Miami and the bay, was typically busy with evening joggers, cyclists, and tourists taking photos of the skyline. But as she pulled into the small parking area near her swimming spot, she was pleased to find it empty. She gathered her usual swimming gear, a waterproof watch, goggles, a bright pink towel that had been a gift from Carmen, and a small waterproof bag containing her car keys and ID. Isabela was a cautious swimmer who always followed safety protocols, despite her years of experience in these waters. She left her phone in the car, locked securely in the glove compartment, as she always did to avoid the temptation to check work emails during her meditation time. The water temperature was perfect, warm enough to be comfortable, but cool enough to be refreshing after the oppressive heat of the Miami summer day. Isabela waded in slowly, allowing her body to adjust to the change in temperature while her eyes scanned the water for any signs of marine life. Even during her recreational swims, she couldn't help but observe and catalog the creatures that shared these waters with her. She began with her usual routine, 10 minutes of easy freestyle to warm up, followed by longer, more challenging distances that would push her cardiovascular system and clear her mind of the day's frustrations. The water was exceptionally clear that evening, and she could see several feet down to the sandy bottom where small fish darted between patches of turtle grass. Isabella had been swimming for about 30 minutes when she noticed lights from a boat approaching the cove. This was unusual but not unheard of. Occasionally, fishing boats or pleasure craft would anchor near the jetties to take advantage of the protected waters. She paused in her swimming and treaded water, watching as a sleek white powerboat with tinted windows slowly entered the cove. The boat's behavior struck her as odd. Instead of anchoring or passing through, it seemed to be circling the area where she was swimming. Isabella was an experienced waterman who understood boat traffic patterns, and this didn't match any normal recreational or fishing activity. The boat's engines were running unusually quietly, and no one on deck was visible despite the boat's size suggesting a crew of at least 2 or 3 people. Isabella's scientific training had taught her to observe carefully before jumping to conclusions, but her intuition was telling her that something wasn't right about this situation. She began swimming toward shore, maintaining a calm pace to avoid attracting attention while keeping the boat in her peripheral vision. As she moved closer to the jetty where she had left her towel and gear, the boat suddenly accelerated and headed directly toward her position. Isabella's calm turned to alarm as she realized the boat was not going to change course. She dove underwater and swam hard toward the rocks, hoping to reach the protection of the jetty before the boat could intercept her. When she surfaced behind the largest rock formation, gasping for air and trying to orient herself, she could hear voices speaking in Spanish from the direction of the boat. The voices were agitated, and though she couldn't make out specific words over the sound of the boat's engines and the waves against the rocks, the tone suggested urgency or frustration. Isabella remained hidden behind the rocks, trying to control her breathing and assess her situation. Her gear was on the small beach area about 50 yards away, but reaching it would require swimming across open water where the boat could easily spot her. She decided to wait and see if the boat would leave, hoping that whatever had brought it to the cove was not specifically related to her presence. After what felt like hours but was probably only 10 or 15 minutes, the boat's engines revved and it began moving away from the cove. Isabella waited until the sound faded completely, before carefully swimming to where she had left her belongings. When she reached the small beach area, her heart sank. Her bright pink towel was gone. At first, she thought the wind might have blown it into the water, and she spent several minutes searching the shoreline and scanning the surface of the bay. But there was no sign of the towel, and the night had been virtually windless. Someone had deliberately taken it, though Isabella couldn't understand why anyone would want an old beach towel. More troubling was the discovery that her small waterproof bag was also missing. The bag had contained her car keys and driver's license, items that would make it impossible for her to drive home and could potentially compromise her safety if they fell into the wrong hands. Isabella began to panic as she realized she was stranded at the isolated swimming spot, without transportation or identification. She considered her options carefully. Her cell phone was locked in her car, so she couldn't call for help. The nearest phone booth or business was at least a mile away along a poorly lit stretch of the causeway. Walking in her wet swimsuit along a road known for occasional criminal activity seemed dangerous, especially given the strange encounter with the boat. Isabella decided to try breaking into her own car to retrieve her phone. She had locked herself out before and knew that the older Honda's windows could sometimes be manipulated if you knew the right technique. After 20 minutes of careful work with a piece of driftwood, she managed to create enough gap to trigger the door lock mechanism. Once she had her phone, Isabella's first instinct was to call the police. But as she began dialing 911, she hesitated. What exactly would she report? A boat had entered a public waterway which was perfectly legal. Her towel and bag were missing, but she had no proof they had been stolen rather than lost. The police would likely view it as a case of misplaced beach gear and suggest she file a property report in the morning. Instead, she called Carmen, who answered on the second ring despite the late hour. Isabella explained the situation as calmly as possible, trying not to sound paranoid while conveying her genuine concern about what had happened. Carmen immediately offered to drive out and pick her up, and within 30 minutes, Isabella was safely in her sister's car, wrapped in a spare towel and trying to make sense of the evening's events. Carmen drove Isabella home while listening to her detailed account of the boat encounter and the missing items. As a nurse, Carmen was trained to assess situations objectively and look for logical explanations, but even she had to admit that the circumstances seemed suspicious. She encouraged Isabella to report the incident to the police in the morning, if only to create an official record in case something similar happened to other swimmers. Isabella spent a restless night replaying the evening's events in her mind. By morning, she had convinced herself that she might have overreacted to what was probably a coincidence. Perhaps the boat had been engaged in legitimate night fishing and had simply taken a course that happened to intersect with her swimming area. The missing towel and bag could have been taken by other beachgoers who had visited the area after she entered the water. But when she called the Miami-Dade Police Department to report the incident, the officer who took her statement seemed more interested than she had expected. Detective Marcus Williams asked detailed questions about the boat's description, the time of the incident, and whether she had noticed anything unusual in the area during previous visits. He explained that there had been several reports of suspicious boat activity in Biscayne Bay over the past few months, though he didn't provide specific details. Detective Williams was a 20-year veteran of the force who had spent most of his career working cases in Miami's coastal areas. He was familiar with the complexities of marine law enforcement and understood how the city's numerous waterways could be used by criminal organizations for smuggling and other illegal activities. Isabella's report caught his attention because it fit a pattern he had been tracking: boats that appeared to be conducting surveillance or intimidation activities rather than engaging in normal recreational or commercial use. In the days following Isabella's report, Detective Williams conducted a quiet investigation into recent boat activity in the area where she had been swimming. He discovered that several other swimmers and fishermen had reported encounters with boats that seemed to be monitoring rather than engaging in normal water activities. The boats were always different, but the behavior was consistent: approaching swimmers or small boats, circling for several minutes, then departing without any apparent purpose. Williams shared his findings with Isabella when he called to follow up on her report. He advised her to avoid swimming alone in isolated areas for the time being, and to immediately call police if she noticed any similar activity in the future. He also mentioned that the Coast Guard had been alerted to watch for unusual boat traffic in the bay. Isabella appreciated Detective Williams' thoroughness, but she was reluctant to give up her evening swimming routine. The cove had been her sanctuary for 3 years, and she wasn't ready to let one unsettling incident drive her away from the place that brought her peace and connection to the marine environment she loved. She decided to modify her routine rather than abandon it entirely. Instead of swimming alone, she began inviting colleagues from work to join her for evening swims. Dr. James Mitchell, a fellow marine biologist who had recently moved to Miami from California, became a regular swimming partner. James was an experienced open-water swimmer who understood Isabella's passion for the ocean and shared her commitment to marine conservation. For 2 weeks, the modified routine worked well. Isabella and James, sometimes joined by other colleagues, enjoyed their evening swims without any sign of the mysterious boat activity that had concerned Detective Williams. Isabella began to relax and think that perhaps the incident had been an isolated occurrence, with an innocent explanation. On the evening of August 29, 2012, exactly 2 weeks after her first encounter with the unknown boat, Isabella decided to return to her original solo swimming routine. James was out of town at a conference, and her other colleagues were busy with their own evening plans. Isabella felt confident that the danger, if it had ever really existed, had passed. She arrived at the cove just as she had 2 weeks earlier, parking in the same spot and carrying the same gear, except for her original pink towel, which she had replaced with a blue one that Carmen had bought for her. The evening was similar in many ways: warm, humid, with just enough breeze to make the water temperature perfect for swimming. Isabella entered the water with the same careful routine she had followed for years, scanning for marine life and gradually working up to her more challenging distance swimming. The water was slightly murky compared to her previous visit, possibly due to recent storms that had stirred up sediment from the bay bottom. She had been swimming for about 20 minutes when she noticed a light in the water near the jetty where she had left her gear. At first, she thought it might be a flashlight dropped by another swimmer or fisherman, but as she swam closer, she realized it was moving in a pattern that seemed too deliberate to be floating debris. Isabella paused her swimming and treaded water while trying to identify the source of the light. As her eyes adjusted, she could see that it appeared to be some kind of underwater device, possibly a camera or monitoring equipment. The light was blinking in a regular pattern, suggesting it was actively recording or transmitting data. Before she could decide how to respond to this discovery, Isabella heard the familiar sound of boat engines approaching the cove. This time, there were 2 boats, both appearing to be the same type of sleek powerboat she had encountered 2 weeks earlier. The boats entered the cove from different directions, effectively surrounding the area where she was swimming. Isabella's training and experience told her to remain calm and assess the situation objectively, but every instinct was screaming that she was in serious danger. She dove underwater and swam hard toward the deepest part of the cove, hoping to avoid detection while she figured out how to escape. When she surfaced behind the largest rock formation, she could hear voices from both boats. This time, the voices were clearer, and she could make out Spanish phrases that seemed to be coordinating some kind of search operation. One voice was giving directions about search patterns, while another was asking about the target and whether it had been located. Isabella realized with growing horror that she was the target they were discussing. The underwater device she had spotted was apparently being used to track her location, and the boats were conducting a coordinated effort to find her. She was trapped in a relatively small area of water with no way to reach shore without being seen. She remained hidden behind the rocks for over an hour, listening as the boats methodically searched the cove. At one point, she could hear diving equipment being deployed, and she saw underwater lights scanning the area where she had been swimming. Whatever these people wanted with her, they were serious and well-equipped. As the night wore on, Isabella's situation became increasingly desperate. The water temperature was starting to affect her core body temperature, and she was becoming fatigued from treading water and maintaining her position behind the rocks. She knew she couldn't stay hidden indefinitely, but any attempt to swim to shore would expose her to immediate capture. Around midnight, one of the boats suddenly accelerated and left the cove, heading toward the main channel of Biscayne Bay. Isabella could hear excited Spanish conversation from the remaining boat, suggesting that something significant had happened. Within minutes, the second boat also departed, leaving the cove in darkness and silence. Isabella waited another 30 minutes before cautiously swimming toward shore, alert for any sign that the boats might return. When she reached the small beach where she had left her gear, she found the area had been thoroughly searched. Sand was disturbed in patterns that suggested systematic digging, and several pieces of debris that had been there earlier were now arranged in different configurations. Her blue towel was missing just as the pink one had been 2 weeks earlier, but this time, her waterproof bag with keys and ID had been left behind, though it had clearly been opened and its contents examined. Someone had gone through her belongings carefully, looking for something specific. Isabella grabbed her bag and hurried to her car, desperate to get away from the isolated area before the boats returned. As she started the engine and pulled out of the parking area, she noticed a black SUV parked along the causeway about a quarter mile away. The SUV's headlights came on as she passed, and it began following her at a discreet distance. The drive back to Coconut Grove became a terrifying game of cat and mouse, with Isabella taking a circuitous route through residential neighborhoods, while the SUV maintained its surveillance. She finally lost her pursuers by driving into a 24-hour gas station and parking directly under the bright security lights, where she would be visible to the attendant and security cameras. Isabella called Detective Williams from the gas station, reaching him at home despite the late hour. Williams listened to her account with growing concern and immediately dispatched patrol units to check the swimming area and look for the boats she had described. He also arranged for a patrol car to escort her home and to maintain surveillance on her apartment for the remainder of the night. The next morning brought a flurry of activity as Detective Williams expanded his investigation to include federal agencies. The sophisticated coordination of boats and surveillance equipment suggested an operation beyond the capabilities of typical criminal organizations. Williams contacted the FBI's Miami field office and requested assistance from agents who specialized in maritime crime and international smuggling operations. FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen took over the case from Detective Williams, though she kept him involved due to his familiarity with local boat traffic patterns and his relationship with Isabella. Agent Chen was a specialist in cases involving organized crime and maritime smuggling, and she immediately recognized the hallmarks of a professional surveillance operation. Chen's investigation revealed that Isabella had unknowingly been documenting water quality problems that could interfere with a major smuggling operation using Biscayne Bay. Her scientific reports had identified pollution sources and unusual chemical signatures in the water that could potentially expose boats using the bay to transport illegal cargo. More troubling was the discovery that Isabella's research data had been accessed through her work computer by someone with sophisticated hacking capabilities. Her environmental monitoring reports, particularly those detailing pollution patterns in specific areas of the bay, had been downloaded and analyzed by unknown parties who clearly had reasons to keep certain water quality issues secret. Agent Chen realized that Isabella was in serious danger not because of what she had seen during her swimming encounters, but because of what her scientific work might reveal about illegal activities in Biscayne Bay. The boats had been trying to capture her to find out how much she knew, and whether she had shared her suspicions with anyone else. Chen arranged for Isabella to be relocated to a safe house while the investigation continued. Isabella was devastated by the need to abandon her normal life and go into hiding, but she understood that her specialized knowledge made her a continuing target for whoever was using the bay for illegal activities. The investigation took months to develop leads, during which Isabella remained in federal protective custody. Agent Chen's team gradually uncovered a complex smuggling operation that used environmental monitoring data to avoid detection by law enforcement. The smugglers had infiltrated several local environmental organizations and were using their insider knowledge to time their operations around legitimate scientific research activities. Isabella's disappearance was staged by the federal agents to protect her while they built their case against the smuggling organization. Her family was told that she had been relocated for her safety, but couldn't be contacted during the investigation. Carmen was devastated by her sister's sudden disappearance and spent months searching for answers that the authorities couldn't provide. As the federal investigation progressed, it became clear that the smuggling operation was much larger than originally suspected. The organization was importing drugs and weapons through Biscayne Bay, using sophisticated methods that relied on corrupted environmental data to avoid Coast Guard patrols and customs inspections. Isabella's research had inadvertently identified several key aspects of the smuggling routes, including water quality anomalies that corresponded to areas where illegal cargo was transferred between boats. Her scientific reports had been so detailed and accurate that they posed a serious threat to the continued operation of the smuggling network. After 18 months in protective custody, Isabella was given a choice. She could testify against the smuggling organization and then be relocated permanently with a new identity, or she could remain in hiding indefinitely while the investigation continued. Isabella chose to testify, knowing that her scientific expertise could help convict the people responsible for threatening her life. The trial that followed was one of the largest maritime smuggling cases in South Florida history. Isabella's testimony was crucial in explaining how the defendants had used environmental data to evade law enforcement and how their activities had caused significant damage to the marine ecosystem of Biscayne Bay. After the trial ended with multiple convictions, Isabella was relocated to the Pacific Northwest under the Federal Witness Protection Program. She was given a new identity and found work as a marine biologist with the Washington State Department of Fish and Wildlife, continuing her environmental protection work in a different ecosystem. Carmen and the rest of Isabella's family were told that she had been successfully relocated, but could never return to Miami due to the continuing threat from associates of the convicted smugglers. The family was heartbroken by the permanent separation, but they understood that Isabella's safety depended on maintaining her new identity. For 11 years, Isabella lived quietly in Washington State, building a new life while always looking over her shoulder for signs that her past had caught up with her. She stayed in limited contact with her family through carefully monitored communications arranged by federal marshals, but she could never risk visiting Miami or resuming her old identity. Meanwhile, Carmen never stopped searching for clues about what had really happened to her sister. She knew the official story about witness protection, but she hoped that someday she might find a way to reconnect with Isabella, or at least learn more about her new life. In August 2023, exactly 11 years after Isabella's disappearance, a routine maintenance crew working on Miami's storm drain system made a discovery that would resurrect the case. Workers clearing debris from a drainage tunnel that emptied into Biscayne Bay found a bright pink towel wedged against a filtering grate deep within the system. The towel was remarkably well preserved, despite being underwater for over a decade. When Detective Williams, now a captain with the Miami-Dade Police, was called to examine the discovery, he immediately recognized it as potentially connected to Isabella's case. The towel matched the description of the one that had disappeared during her first encounter with the mysterious boats. But the location of the discovery raised new questions about what had happened that night, 11 years earlier. The drainage tunnel where the towel was found was part of a system that connected to underground waterways throughout South Florida. The towel could have entered the system from dozens of different locations, including some that were nowhere near where Isabella had been swimming. Captain Williams contacted Agent Chen, who was now working in the FBI's Washington, D.C. office, to inform her about the discovery. Chen was immediately interested because the towel's location suggested that the smuggling operation might have used the underground drainage system as part of their transportation network. The investigation into the towel's discovery led to a shocking revelation. The smuggling organization had been using Miami's storm drain system to move contraband between Biscayne Bay and inland locations throughout South Florida. The underground tunnels provided a way to transport illegal cargo without being detected by surface surveillance. Isabella's pink towel had apparently been taken as evidence of her presence in the area where the smugglers were conducting their operations. The towel had been kept as proof that they had successfully identified and located their target, but it had eventually been disposed of through the drainage system when it was no longer needed. The discovery of the towel provided new evidence that could be used to prosecute additional members of the smuggling organization who had escaped conviction in the original trial. Agent Chen began working with prosecutors to determine whether Isabella's testimony might be needed for new cases based on the physical evidence from the drainage system. For Carmen, the discovery of her sister's towel was both heartbreaking and hopeful. It confirmed that Isabella had indeed been in danger and that her disappearance was connected to serious criminal activity. But it also raised the possibility that new evidence might lead to additional prosecutions that could finally make it safe for Isabella to return home. Agent Chen was authorized to contact Isabella through the Witness Protection Program to inform her about the towel discovery and ask whether she would be willing to provide additional testimony if needed for new prosecutions. Isabella, now living under the name Sarah Martinez and working as a research scientist for the Pacific Northwest National Laboratory, was shocked to learn that evidence from her case was still surfacing after 11 years. The prospect of returning to Miami, even temporarily, filled Isabella with both longing and terror. She had built a new life in Washington and found peace in the rocky shores and cool waters of Puget Sound, but she had never stopped missing her family and the tropical waters where she had first learned to love the ocean. After lengthy discussions with federal marshals and prosecutors, Isabella agreed to return to Miami to provide testimony in new cases based on the drainage system evidence. The reunion with Carmen was emotional and difficult, as 11 years of separation had changed both sisters in fundamental ways. Carmen had spent the years since Isabella's disappearance working with families of other missing persons and had become an advocate for victims of organized crime. She had never married or started a family of her own, dedicating her life to keeping Isabella's memory alive and helping other families navigate the trauma of having a loved one disappear. Isabella found Miami both familiar and strange after her long absence. The city had continued to grow and change, with new developments transforming areas she remembered from her youth. The cove where she had done her evening swimming was now part of a marine protected area, established partly in response to the environmental damage caused by the smuggling operations she had helped expose. The new trial proceeded quickly, with Isabella's testimony helping to convict several additional defendants who had been involved in the smuggling operation. The discovery of the towel in the drainage system provided crucial physical evidence linking the defendants to the surveillance and intimidation activities that had forced Isabella into hiding. After the trial concluded, Isabella faced the difficult decision of whether to return to her protected life in Washington or try to rebuild her life in Miami. The prosecutors believed that the conviction of the remaining smuggling organization members had eliminated the threat to her safety, but they couldn't guarantee that associates of the convicted criminals wouldn't still pose a danger. Isabella chose to stay in Miami, at least temporarily, to reconnect with her family and help with the environmental restoration efforts in Biscayne Bay. Her expertise in marine biology was crucial for understanding and reversing the damage caused by 11 years of illegal activity in the bay's ecosystem. Working with Carmen and other family members, Isabella began the slow process of rebuilding relationships that had been frozen by her disappearance. It was difficult and sometimes painful, as they all had to navigate the changes that 11 years of separation had brought to their lives. Isabella also returned to her evening swimming routine, though now she chose public beaches with lifeguards and other swimmers rather than isolated coves. The simple pleasure of swimming in warm, tropical water was a reminder of who she had been before her life was disrupted by forces beyond her control. The discovery of the pink towel had not only led to additional convictions, but had also provided closure for Isabella and her family. They finally understood what had happened that night in 2012 and why Isabella had been forced to disappear from their lives. Carmen kept the towel after it was released from evidence, having it professionally cleaned and preserved as a symbol of her sister's courage and the family's perseverance. The towel served as a reminder that even when someone disappears without a trace, evidence of their story can surface years later, providing answers and justice when least expected. Isabella's case became part of law enforcement training programs as an example of how environmental crimes can intersect with organized criminal activity. Her story illustrated the importance of protecting scientists and researchers whose work might inadvertently expose illegal operations. The drainage system where the towel was found was thoroughly investigated and modified to prevent its use for smuggling activities. The discovery led to improvements in monitoring and security for Miami's underground infrastructure, helping to prevent similar operations in the future. For Isabella, the experience of returning to Miami and reclaiming her identity was both healing and challenging. She had to learn to balance her new life with the remnants of her old one, finding ways to honor both the person she had been and the person she had become during her years in hiding. The woman who had disappeared after a night swim in 2012 was different from the one who returned to testify in 2023, but the core passion for marine conservation that had defined her life remained unchanged. If anything, her experience had deepened her commitment to protecting the environments that served as both sanctuary and habitat for countless species. The pink towel, found 11 years later in a drain that connected the underground waterways of South Florida, had become more than just evidence in a criminal case. It was a symbol of how the truth can survive even when buried in the most unlikely places, and how justice can surface when least expected, carried by the very systems that criminals thought would hide their crimes forever. Isabella Rodriguez had vanished after a night swim, but her story had never really ended. It had simply been hidden, like her towel, in the dark places beneath the surface, waiting for the right moment to emerge and complete the narrative that had begun with one woman's love for the ocean and her unwitting discovery of the secrets hidden in its depths.